two guests. Our first speaker will be Darrell Whitley from Fort Collins, Colorado. And he'll be talking to us about looking for stones in mountain rivers. And then he'll be followed by Anthony Ankowicz, a very talented stone hunter and artist. Both of the speakers today have been successful long-term stone hunters and are willing to share their experiences with us today. Now, a majority of the rocks used in viewing stone practices are taken from rivers and streams or bays throughout the world. Stone clubs and individuals search riverbanks for stones, looking for stones with provocative shapes, colors, interesting patterns, or surface textures. On the right is a group from a stone club in the northern island of Hokkaido in Japan. They go out regularly on the Ishikari River and other rivers in northern Japan, searching for stones. On the left, I'm looking at an interesting landscape stone I picked up on a field trip in the mountains in the Philippines along the Tanay River. So, as I mentioned, most of the stones used currently coming from aquatic habitats. Later, we may have a program on collecting on dry land or stones coming from the soils. But today's program will feature stones from rivers and bays and other aquatic habitats. Our first speaker will be Darrell Whitley, who's going to share with us his experiences about searching for stones. So bear with us as we switch over from me to Darrell.
Okay, I will share. Okay, is that working, Tom?
Well, I can still see your list of slides on the left.
Oh, thank you. There we go.
There you go.
Okay. So today I'm going to be talking about finding stones mainly in mountain rivers because they are quite different than other types of rivers. So one of the places where I search for stones is in this river. I say here that it's fast, dangerous, and cold because indeed this is snow melt. And in fact, more people died in the river when they were tubing. So it is a dangerous river in the summertime. This is the same river in the fall. And as you can see, if you're going to search for stones in this river, you're not going to have much success in the summertime, but you can have success in the fall. And that's when most of the stones are exposed. But at the same time, you don't want to wait too long because this is the same river in winter. And depending on when it snows, access of the river can disappear in October or November or December, depending on how quickly it freezes over and how quickly it snows. So again, these are high mountain rivers, not the same as the slow meandering rivers that you'll find in lowlands. These mountain rivers are constantly changing. I have said to people that stones and boulders the size of cars can disappear in one night during major flooding. This flooding I'm showing here occurred in 2013. And to drive that point home, cars can disappear overnight during flooding. I have a neighbor who had a camper that was parked along this river when it flooded in 2013. And not only did the flood take the camper and drive it downstream, they never found a single piece of that camper, not a wheel, not a piece of metal, nothing. It just completely disappeared. So I have seen boulders as large as a car disappear overnight in one flood. It didn't just move downstream, it completely disappeared. There are mountain rivers in Japan, obviously. One Dutch hydrologist said that they have no rivers in Japan, only waterfalls, which is an exaggeration, but the waters can be extremely fast and fast moving in Japan. So the take home from these slides is that it's just as important to know when to collect as it is where to collect. And at least for wild mountain rivers, these rivers are constantly changing. So new stones are revealed every year. I don't think you can collect out a rapidly changing mountain stream because they do change so dramatically from one year to the next. My experience has been that stones move downstream rapidly and anything can be found anywhere. I've seen some collectors who say, well, there's my favorite spot here, or there's a good place to look for stones there. In the mountain streams I'm used to, that doesn't seem to happen. Anything can be anywhere. Sometimes you hear people talk about the original source for certain stones. For example, in central Wyoming, there is an apple green jade that is highly prized. It's actually a nephrite, but that apple green nephrite is known only from river stones. They have never found the actual source of those, of the jade. So normally we think of wild rivers as having round stones that are worn smooth, but that's not always the case. A stone could spend 1,000 years in a protected pocket of rock and sand. And I have sometimes found sand pockets that contain very nice stones that were still had a great deal of shape. Of course, most stones are worn down, but obviously when we're looking for viewing stones or looking for sui seki, we are looking for stones that are exceptional. I looked for stones for many years and I was unsuccessful. And about 10 years ago, that started to change. And I think the reason it started to change was I did a lot more studying. I spent a lot of time studying the Japanese exhibition catalogs to sort of train my eye as to what a good stone looks like. And then when you go to a river, you're more likely to recognize one. There is a phrase in Japan, the Kawa Dojo, the school of the riverbank, if you will. And it does become important to identify good material just with a glance, because there's thousands and thousands of stones on the river. How do you pick the ones that are interesting? Today, I would also say study worldwide exhibition catalogs, because viewing stones are not limited to Japan. And over time, you will learn what kind of stones are available in your area. But I do emphasize that, at least from my point of view, it's good to find a wild river, one that is dramatically changing, and then to spend a lot of time on that river. So here's an example. Here's a river that is also in my neighborhood in northern Colorado. And I'll just sort of pose this for you to think about for a second or two. Is this a wild river, or is this a mitigated river? Is it a river that's been tamed, if you will? So anybody want to chime in? Tom's not allowed to answer.
Okay, must be mitigated. Looking at the rocks in front.
Yes. So yes, this river has been mitigated. All of those rocks along the left side of the image have been brought in and placed along the river to prevent it from coming out of its bank and eroding a road, which is just off to the left at the top of that embankment. So in this river, I've known at least a couple of different stone collectors that have come to Colorado, and they've looked up and down this river and they go, there are no stones there. And that's because the natural stones have been replaced by this fill rock, and the river isn't constantly changing anymore. It's relatively stable. So when rivers have been mitigated, that is not good for stone collecting, in my experience. If you look at rivers in Japan, at least as they flow through the major cities, they have been heavily mitigated. This is a photograph of the Kamogawa as it flows through Kyoto. That doesn't mean you can't find stones there. It just means that the rivers are not changing as much, not changing as quickly. And it indeed becomes easier to collect out because you're not getting new material all the time. I lived in Japan in the fall of 2019. I lived in Nagano, and this is the river that was very close, like within 1 block of our apartment. And on the left, you can see that this river has also been heavily mitigated. The river is here flowing probably about a meter deep. Then there's this embankment, then there is a walking trail, then there's a second embankment. And while we were in Japan in 2019, there was a typhoon, and this river rose approximately 4 meters. The water was up over this walking path. But there was very little change in the river itself, even though there was a huge amount of flooding. Now, that doesn't mean there's no collecting. There are bars of gravel and stones in the river in places, and you can still collect a little bit. I found this stone in the Susebana while I was there. And this was just a photograph taken in my apartment. Here's another stone from the Susebana that I found while I was in Japan. But compared to what I find in the wild rivers in Colorado, is much more difficult. So some people might say there are few stones left in the rivers of Japan. You sometimes hear people say, oh, they've been over collected. And that might be true, but I think there's a second factor at work, which is the rivers in Japan have usually been heavily mitigated, at least close to the cities and as the rivers go through the cities. And so you lose the natural variation when you get that mitigation, and you don't get the constant change that occurs with wild mountain rivers. So here are some of my tips for looking for stones in rivers. One is just to walk very slowly. In fact, sometimes just stop and stand and look, or even sit down and look. I have on many occasions saw an interesting stone, walked toward it, stopped and looked at it, but in the process of stopping and looking at that stone, I saw another stone even better close by. And I think that occurred because I had slowed down and I was looking carefully. Another thing I do is I look twice. I walk everything in 2 directions, especially if the light is coming in at an angle, because if the light is coming in at an angle, when you walk one direction, you'll see something different than when you walk the other direction. Obviously, looking for color is good, even if the color is black. That's not always possible. Searching in a light rain. If it's just a drizzling rain and it wets the stones, as the stones are wet in this photograph, it becomes much easier to distinguish between individual stones. They look less like one feel and they look more like individual stones. And of course, look for shape, especially if the color is hidden. Sometimes there's mud, sometimes there's algae, and then the only thing you can do is look for shape. So sometimes you don't see color or shape. I have occasionally just looked for what could be the bottom of a good stone, a bottom that is flat. And sometimes when you pick it up and turn it over, you actually do get a good stone. Sometimes you find a good stone, but when you pick it up and look at it and turn it over in your hands, you find it has an even better shape after you pick it up. So you do have to try to pay attention to what stones have potential and to look at those stones more. One strategy I use is to follow the water line. Since the water rises in the spring and falls during the fall and is high in the summer and low in the winter, I go to the river every say week or even 2 weeks and search as the water line changes. And this gives me the advantage that I can look in the shallows of the water, but what I'm looking at is changing every week. So I'm going to show you some stones. This is a stone I collected here in Colorado. It doesn't have a shape that you might think of as a good Suiseki stone, but it has amazing texture and color. The reds and whites are jasper, and the black is actually a softer material with a lot of mica. So one thing that's hard to appreciate from this photograph is that this stone has deep grooves where it's black and has protruding formations where the stone is red or where the stone is white. So it has just an incredible amount of texture. And just as an example of how light changes your perception, here's the same stone under different lighting conditions. So I think I prefer this photograph, but you can see the stone looks quite different just with the changing of the light. When I found this stone, there was only one little bit approximately right here that you could see any color. The rest of this was covered in muck, and you could not tell what color the stone was at all. This is a green stone that I found. I checked the specific gravity. It is not nephrite. It has a specific gravity of 3.4. That would make it the same specific gravity as jade, but also the same specific gravity as olivine or peridot. So it's more likely that it's in the olivine peridot family. The other thing about this stone is that it's very, very hard, and I found it in a pocket of sand, and it is highly polished by the river. So sometimes you do get stones from the river that are super highly polished, and you don't have to do a thing to them. So it doesn't always take years and years and years of hand rubbing to bring out a patina on the stone. Sometimes they just naturally have a very good patina, especially if the stone is super hard. This is a stone I collected for the pattern. There is a red jasper running through this, but the rest of the stone is some softer black material, similar to what I was talking about before. But it also has some other sort of mineral intrusions in here. And so I collected this stone just because it looks like a snowfall pattern to me. So I look at this stone and think that there's a flower and that it's nighttime and that there is snow is falling in this image. Here is one of my stones that has a very sculptural shape. You might think of it as a Henry Moore, but I think of it more as a Jean Arp stone. I took two different images here to sort of show you what the stone looks like from different point of views. And I took this from the website of the Huntington. The Isekai Club in Southern California was holding a virtual show, and the Huntington had my stone up at one point during the virtual show, so I grabbed that image. You'll notice that the base is perhaps lighter than you would expect or like. That's because I carved the base about 2 weeks before this photograph was taken. The wood is mahogany. It's now turned a much richer, darker brown color. So I sometimes get questions about why I chose the base I did and why it has the color it has. And it was just partly timing. Here is another stone from the same area in the river, same material as that stone, but this one just has a very quiet mountain shape. Indeed, this is just a really nice stone to touch because it's so smooth. It's about 10 inches long. This stone is about 16 inches across, about 40 centimeters, and weighs about 60 pounds. This is a stone that I found in a sand pocket. Here I'm just showing you that sometimes I keep a suibon with some, in this case, coarse sand in it, and I just use it as a way of displaying a stone that I've just collected to see what it looks like. Here is another stone from the same river. The story behind this stone is that I don't remember collecting it, but it made it into my the pile of interesting stones that I have at the house. And I was going through the stones one day and I pulled this out and went, actually, that's quite a good stone. It's about 16 inches long as well, so about 40 centimeters. And there's a lot of material that comes out of the river here that reminds me of stones from the Setagawa, a very dark, blackish hornblende material. Okay, so my last slide. As far as hunting for stones in wild mountain rivers, obviously people have their favorite collecting sites, but when rivers are changing dynamically, you want to be looking for new collecting sites and even checking back in on locations that you don't think are very good, and get out into the mountains every week and look for stones. So with that, Tom, I will turn things back over to you.
Okay, well, thank you, Darrell, and bear with me for a moment as I switch over to our next speaker.
Tom, is it possible to fit in a question before we move on? Tom? Darrell, can you hear me?
Go ahead.
Yes, I can
Go
hear
ahead
you.
and ask Darrell the question now while
Yeah.
I'm doing this.
Yeah, that's fine.
Darrell, I would like to know, if you look at the origins of mountain rivers,
Yes.
the stones at the top of or where the river originates would be wilder than the ones much further would be much smoother. So
Yes.
where would you say your favorite or best spots for collecting be? At the source or as far away from the source as possible?
Sort of in between. The trouble with the source is that many of them are just too jagged, and occasionally you do find stones that are sufficiently worn, but I have to come down almost 50 miles from the source before I start finding good stones more regularly. Okay.
I'd also like to ask a question if I could. Can you hear me?
Tom, you're muted. Tom, you're still muted.
Am I on mute? This is Jack.
I hear you. I hear
Jack,
you. Okay.
Can we hold the question till later? Let's go ahead and get through the whole program, and then we can take as much time as we want to ask the questions.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. Let's move on to our second speaker now, Tony Ankowicz, who's going to talk about collecting stones in Georgian Bay, habitat which I expect most of you have never tried to look for stones in. And Tony is a superb collector and a wonderful artist. And if you look at the base at this stone on the right, this is one that he carved, he made. So let's move on to our second one, and then we'll open it to as many questions as you want.
Oh, okay.
Okay, Tony,
All right, great. Hi all, I appreciate this opportunity to share with you my rock hunting experiences. As Tom suggested, hunting for stone material adds another dimension to stone collecting. I find myself far more aware of the environment and more intimately connected to the spirit of a stone when I know when, where, and how it was found. So approaches to finding rocks are generally dependent on the local geology and time of year, as Darrell so well described. So for this presentation, I'll start with a brief overview of the unique geology of the Georgian Bay area, and then focus on how I go about looking for these special rocks. First, a little geographic orientation. So here are the Great Lakes of North America. They're circled, and the blue arrow is pointing to Georgian Bay, which is enlarged in the right-hand frame. On its own, this bay would be a fairly large body of water, as you can see from the dimensions in the lower left. And I grew up in Ontario, Canada. Our family vacationed almost every summer along the shores. Next. So the Canadian Shield, pictured here in purple, is a solid rock formation composed of material that was formed well over 4 billion years ago. And next. Next, Tom, thanks. Tremendous forces folded these molten rocks into striking veined configurations, which are most dramatically illustrated in the left-hand picture. You can see how the dark veined layers almost fold over on themselves. These photographs were taken along one of our northern highways. The vertical lines in the left-hand picture are remnants of blasting boreholes left from the construction of this highway. So this massive Canadian Shield structure was originally a mountain range, larger than the Himalayas, but over the course of millions of years of erosion and many glaciations, this area has been reduced to a flattened topography. Now, I'll touch on the other sculpting force which helped create this unique geology. Next. This graphic illustrates the retreating stages of the last glacier about 14,000 years ago. You can see, starting from the upper left, that over the course of 10,000 years, the ice has receded and the water level, as seen in the lower right, has remained essentially the same for the last 4,000 years. And that's an important point I'll get back to later. Next. So the tremendous weight of this ice sheet, upwards of 2 miles or 3 kilometers thick, scraped this landscape flat and in the process revealed the direction of its movement. In the landscape picture on the left, on the right, shows how it's all been weathered and sculpted over the years. You'll note the windswept white pines in the background, shaped by the sometimes brutal prevailing westerly winds. Next. So islands such as this were worn smooth by this last glacier, but eventually plants seem to find a place to grow. Many of these islands have a penjing feel to them. So one would expect that any rocks found in this area would be as weathered and worn by the elements as this one. Next. Note how worn down it is from years of tumbling with other rocks, much like something you'd find on a beach or riverbed. But while diving a number of years ago using only a mask and snorkel, I was amazed to find a highly sculpted, layered stone similar to this one. Next. For these types of stones to survive in this delicate condition, they need to be at least 6 feet or 2 meters beneath the reach of the breakup of the spring ice. Next. What makes these stones unique is that they haven't been weathered by the elements in the traditional sense. Instead, they've been slowly dissolved in the fresh waters of the Great Lakes. Now, how exactly these stones were shaped in this manner versus all the other surrounding rocks is still a little unclear. A few geologists I've spoken with haven't provided a reasonable explanation as to how this would happen. Next. Considering that the delicate features of these stones couldn't have survived the movement of the last glaciation, I venture to say that they've been sculpted into these shapes over the course of the last 4,000 years. And just by the nature of the Georgian Bay geology, it's very unlikely that I would ever find a traditional landscape stone, but sometimes you don't see what you're not looking for. My focus has always been on looking for rocks that connect me with nature. I grew up around them, and I've always been enchanted by these sculpted fragments of the Canadian Shield. So, when looking for rock hunting sites around these islands, these are a few techniques I use to increase our chances of finding stone material. I'll often refer to Google satellite maps. Next. such as this photograph, which illustrates shallow areas around the White Islands. By using the scale distance key on the map, I can tell how far we'll have to swim between the islands. And by observing the color gradient around the islands, I can tell how deep the water will be. For instance, the darkest areas in this image represent a depth of about 20 feet or 6 meters, which is well beyond what we're currently able to access by merely snorkeling. Next. We'll also look to the shore for random rocks, which have been pushed out by the ice, indicated in a nearby boulder field. And you can see the veining in this layer. It turns amazing once you get into underwater. Sometimes they become they look like fins, large fins. But the most productive areas tend to be in between underwater ridges. Though it's difficult to identify these structures from the surface, satellite maps help. In the end, it requires a lot of swimming in very cold water. Next. And these are the sorts of islands we're looking for. Here's one of us swimming along the surface, scanning the bottom for unusual rocks. And in the middle of summer, these islands are often covered with a bright orange bloom of lichens. After discovering my first underwater rock, I began collecting them simply for the thrill of the hunt. I stored them either on our cottage property or in easily accessible underwater piles. And at the time, I didn't know what to do with them beyond just collecting and showing them off. Next. Next. This is one of my sons, David, who's been most helpful in finding stone material. In our small 14-foot aluminum boat, which is ideal for accessing shallow areas in between the islands, but you can imagine how crowded this boat becomes with 2 or more divers, assorted diving gear, and filled to capacity with a precious load of rocks. Next. Here we're strategizing over areas to explore. And after swimming and diving for several hours in 64-degree water or 17 degrees Celsius, next, I would often have to warm myself up on the rocks like a walrus. It's interesting how randomly scattered these unique rocks are, like this one. It's already been cleaned of zebra mussels, which you can see scattered on the bottom. This is the first stage in judging whether a rock is worth the effort to harvest. You'll note how unremarkable all the surrounding rocks are. Next. This is that same rock with nylon straps and a wooden beam, which helps us lift it off the bottom and walk it to shallower water. And to the right is this rock cleaned and ready for placement as a landscaping stone on our property. For even larger rocks, we've occasionally used a winch mounted beneath the boat to lift it straight up off the bottom, though you can imagine how dangerous that can be. I've also considered using inflatable salvage bags, but we're not really set up on shore to manage such large boulders. So we have to leave these larger rocks where we find them and simply enjoy the memory of their discovery. Many years after finding my first stone, I was introduced to Cavello and Yoshimura's book, The Japanese Art of Stone Appreciation. It was only at that point I realized how these stones could be considered an art form. Next. These are a couple of my early attempts at presenting these stones, following the Japanese aesthetic. But I quickly realized that most of my stones didn't conform very well to this type of presentation, so I adjusted the stand designs to accommodate these unique stones. Next. Here are a couple of my looks-like stones, a style I prefer not to collect, but these were just too evocative to leave underwater. The one on the left was purposely left untitled. I didn't want to narrow the viewer's first impression. Whereas the one on the right, I felt compelled to assign a name to, out of cautious respect. It's titled Jin. describes a pre-Islamic mythologic creature, which we in the West call a genie. Next. And these are a couple of stones I found challenging to carve stands for. The one on the left is titled Perched, as if ready to take off. And the simple crescent-shaped stone on the right was left untitled. Both stands were carved out of cocobolo, a beautiful Central American hardwood that holds up very well to carving and ages to a rich, dark color. You can see how unusual these stones are considering they've been harvested from such an active environment. Next. And this stone is truly a remarkable find. From this picture, it's difficult to get a sense of its scale. It weighs about 49 pounds or 22 kilograms. We had to photograph it in the middle of winter to meet one of an entry deadline for one of Tom's books. But due to its height, we weren't able to photograph it inside. So it was set up in my garage on a particularly cold February day in Wisconsin. It was about 10 degrees Fahrenheit or negative 12 degrees Celsius. Next, it's called Mifu's staff in honor of the famous Chinese stone connoisseur. These are my three sons who I have conscript into rock hunting excursions and my crouching photographer. With that, I'll thank you all for your attention.
Thank you. Thank you, Tony.